What are you reading this summer? BookTV wants to know.
Well, I've got a whole long list of books, but some are unfinished, some are new. The first book I'm working on is MONSOON, which is a book by Robert Kaplan about the whole issue of Central Asia, where I think most of the politics of the next 25 years are going to occur. And I have read chapters of it when I've traveled to various parts like Indonesia, but I want to read the whole book. I haven't finished it. I started it in February. Another book was given to me by a fellow in my office from the American Academy of Mechanical Engineers who worked with me on the whole question of water. And I said to him, tell me what the problems with water are going to be over the next 20 or 30 years. And this book he gave me and he said, I want you to read it. I never was able to write a perfect report, but it's a good book to read about the whole question of water. And it's an issue that in Congress we really do need to think about in the future. George Friedman wrote a book called The Next 100 Years, which is a fascinating book that looks out 100 years and looks at who our major allies will be, those countries we're involved with, will have trouble with. And so when he came out with this next book, which is called The Next Decade, I figured, well, that's within my lifetime, so maybe I better get that one read and see what's going to happen, at least from the perspective of people who look at trends. One of the fascinating things in his first book was that he said the countries we'll be involved with will be Turkey and Poland, and I thought, wow, I never thought about that. I mean, I thought about Turkey, but I'd never thought about Poland. And then he said we're going to have a war within the next 100 years with Mexico. So there was a whole lot of things in that book that were very fascinating. So I decided I'm going to read his second book, which is really a little more down to earth. The other thing is, as congressman, everybody who writes a book sends one to the office and says, you ought to read this book. And so we get all kinds of books, many of which I put in the drawer and send out to my office in Seattle. But I also get people who recommend books to me and say, you should read this book, friends and so forth. And one of the books was sent to me by my longtime secretary, Nancy James, and it's about China, the man who loved China. This is a YMCA director who went to China in the late 1800s and chronicled, this is the most definitive chronicling of China's contribution to science in the world. And she said, you ought to read this if you want to understand where this boom is coming from in China. It's not new. It's not like yesterday they discovered science or yesterday they've been there for 6,000 years. And here's a guy that put it all together in a very good book. And she said, you ought to read it. So I've got a lot of books on. I started this book and I'll have to start it again because I've forgotten some of what I read in the first part. But these books will keep me occupied this summer.
Tell us what you're reading this summer. Send us a tweet at BookTV.